Welcome to a brand new podcast series on coaching tools and approaches, brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body, which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Claudia, coach and entrepreneur and co-founder of The Growing Coaches. Research shows that certain approaches can be effective. However, it also shows that integrating more than one approach can be even more effective. I will be in conversation with experts and look in more detail at some of these approaches, what the research says, how coaches can apply this in their practice, as well as some live demos to understand better how the approach is put into practice. Our aim in this series is to bring you closer to the research and information on a variety of approaches that you might like to put into practice. Welcome to part 2 of my chat with Willson. In the last episode, we talked about the progression of this approach from therapy and some of the key components of CBC. Today, we will start by putting this approach into action with a live demo.
What would be the topic that you'd like me to try and help you with today?
So it would be to-do list. So after having kids, to-do lists became my best friends. And of course, after also reading the research about taking things out of your mind and putting them in paper so that you can actually concentrate better and all those things, I'm a big fan of to-do lists. And I think I do a pretty good job in recording things into my to-do list and recently scheduling them in some way. Google has tasks, which are very helpful in putting that there. However, sometimes, it comes to the end of the day. I'm now reading the Inner Game book. And so I've tried to get myself out of see myself from outside and analyze my day and sort of without judgment, what am I doing? And then the thing that sort of comes up is went through her day without looking at her to-do list. And so more of a reactive type of approach and probably more of a what I remember type of approach as the priorities. And so I want to change that.
What exactly would you want to change it to? How would you like to be different as far as the to-do list is concerned?
I think, so if I decide to ignore my to-do list, then that I consciously ignore it rather than it being that I didn't even look at it.
So it's about somehow making a clearer decision that you don't forget about the to-do list. Sometimes you might decide, I'm not going to attend to that today, but you don't want to just forget about it.
So I want to every day open it, at least, first thing, and revisit it. And
I see.
So I'm doing it almost on the night before. But so this also came after I did a trip I had to fly one day and I needed to get a lot of things done. So the day before I sat down and I said, what are the 3 things I'm going to do tomorrow? Surprise, surprise. I did the 3 things that I wanted to do. I did 2.5. And then at the end of the day, it felt like a really productive day because I had done those 2.5 things that I wanted to do. So what did I do correctly? I was realistic, as in I chose, 3 and I did 2.5. So I was realistic, and then also did what I was set out to do. And on a daily basis where I'm not in a plane, that doesn't necessarily happen. And so I'm trying to see how can I stick to my to-do list.
If you took a wild guess, what do you think is the obstacle to sticking to your to-do list?
Reactive, being more reactive on my daily, because on days where I have a bigger, when I don't have so many meetings scheduled, or when I'm not just working on gaps, then if I have like a 3-hour chunk where I have nothing to do, nothing more than my to-do list, I will sit down and look at my to-do list and start doing. Mm-hmm. So it has something to do with the fact that you get work time in between meetings. And so there are some things that, of course, come from the meeting or the next meeting, that are there. There's also other distractions, or that I sit down and just by memory start doing something rather than going to my to-do list and looking at everything. So I'm assuming it's under the assumption that my memory will be better than me sitting down and looking at the whole list and choosing, what makes sense on those minutes.
Mm-hmm. And so do you have a routine for when you would typically consult your to-do list? Is it like brushing your teeth that you would normally look at it at a certain time of the day?
So I have a routine too. At the moment, that routine ends up being in the evening when I'm almost preparing for the next day.
Isn't that more of an adding to it time than a doing it time?
Assessing it. It's I look at it.
Assessing it.
Yeah, I look at it and I think to myself, what did I do today? And I cross out whatever I did. And then I think, okay, what do I need to do tomorrow? The adding happens actually during the day as well. So
I'm with you.
So I would like that planning bit, that assessing bit, to be at the start of the day.
I understand.
Or during the day at some point.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of when we may have to think a little more carefully around this, but just trying to flesh out what the alternative could look like? When might there be a good time of the day to make it part of your routine to stop and have a look at your to-do list? So you're not just relying, because it sounds like a bit of the problem is almost a positive thought about how much you can rely on your memory, if you like. And this is interesting. Of course, in CBC, we're not interested in positive or negative thoughts. We're interested in helpful or not so helpful thoughts. And so sometimes unhelpful thoughts can be positive if you tend to think, it's fine, I'll remember, which is a positive idea about your memory, but it may not be optimally helpful. Does that ring true?
Yeah, I hadn't seen it that way, but I guess that's where my frustration comes, that I feel my memory is not the best source for what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and do you think it should be?
I'm struggling to say no.
Right. There may be a little bit of a competition there between your demand about how you feel your memory should work and the realities of running a human brain.
Yeah. I guess, in a dream world setting, how nice is it if you don't have to lose time looking at your to-do list, but rather almost like a robot be able to execute.
Yeah.
So there might be something about me seeing my to-do list as me going into my to-do list as something that takes time.
Right, exactly. So that's the other really interesting thought that just popped out there, wasn't it? You did a great job of you see that just come to your mind, like, oh. Partly there's a sort of overly positive idea, it's like rose-tinted idea about what an optimum human being should look like in terms of like just having everything online almost and remembering everything effectively. So there's a little bit of an unhelpful demand there, arguably, and also a slightly negative thought about what it means to use your to-do list, that actually why would you do it if you thought it was a busy person? Why would you do it if you thought it was a waste of time?
Yeah.
Go back one step if I can. When would you think would be the best time? If you were sort of the architecture of your typical day, what's your idea about when the best time would be to look at your to-do list? So you can look at it again in the evening, but it sounds like we might want to get another glance online.
So almost like setting it as a routine after every single call. So I finish a call, like, for example, I'll finish this recording with you. Mm-hmm. Before I go and do anything else, I open my to-do list.
So that's a really interesting. How do you feel about that as an idea?
Well, after I finish recording, I'll probably want to go and get a cup of coffee, or I will want to.
Okay, so we have some. So one of your thoughts is that it becomes like a default. Do you want to almost train yourself that before you do anything else, you have a quick glance at your to-do list? Do you feel that? Is that?
Yeah. The thing is that in the evening, when I look at it, I'm usually relaxed. So it's after I've put the kids to bed, after, I'm already relaxed. So there, it's really easy to look at the to-do list because it's on a relaxed mode.
Right.
And I actually not enjoy it. I wouldn't say the word is enjoy it, but it's like when you put the dishwasher on and you press start, that's also my dishwasher, and that means I finished cleaning the house, or whatever, or that's it's almost like that type of it has become that type of signal. I look at my to-do list and that's the end of the day, or that's that relaxing, that's that not me time, because it's not me time, but it's that time of the day where it's like nothing else. There's no other distractions. This is just me and whatever I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's usually there. Whereas if I do it after a meeting or during the day, there isn't really that, or I haven't built it in. So ideally I would say, okay, I'm with my cup of coffee, drinking my cup of coffee, and there I'm looking at my to-do list. That would be the dream scenario.
That's a dream scenario. So and there is wisdom in that, isn't there? In tethering a new habit onto an old habit. So if you have the habit of having a coffee and you try and associate looking at your to-do list with having your coffee, that would give you a good cue to look at your to-do list more often than you do. But maybe sounds like behind this, though, there's a doubt in your mind about whether that is a wholly realistic expectation, or would you see that's something you did want to test out?
Well, I'm trying to think of today when I would have when in the day would I have been doing it?
Good
so
question.
I had a call in the first thing in the morning. Then I jumped into the second call. Then I had the meeting ended early, which meant I could do some things during that time. I didn't open my to-do list. So that would have been the perfect time to actually open my to-do list. And then I had another meeting, and then lunch quickly, and then podcast. So if I think about it, when would it have been the ideal moment? Would have been between after the 2 meetings in the morning, and in those hour that I had to do stuff.
But my comment, though, is, if you don't mind, that still sounds a bit reactive. It's waiting for a good time to show up for you to then you'd look at your to-do list, rather than us building into some form of new habit. If you imagine doing something like brushing your teeth, and you only did that when the opportunity arose, how high would you rate the chances of you brushing your teeth twice a day? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I would get busy and not brush my teeth. So
would there be because I guess part of me wonders, is there a good time early in the day to sort of set, because I guess there's something sometimes about sort of starting as you mean to go on. And my prediction would be that you're more likely to use your to-do list through the rest of the day if you started your day using it.
I guess I just identified fear.
Right.
So
that's right. Tell me about that.
Because if I go from memory, my day seems manageable. And I think there is a bit of fear that I'll open my to-do list, very unconscious. So I don't think I've ever thought about this. So that I will open my to-do list, and then of course I won't be in the right frame of mind to do whatever it is, because I'll get stressed about all the things that are in my to-do list. Even though, when I think about it rationally, it's like, okay, but you've put it in a way where it shouldn't be stressful, because you have the top priorities at the top, and it's very clear. It shouldn't cause stress, but it's more like, will it put me in the wrong frame of mind,
right,
and in a very hectic type of mind frame.
Okay, so in one of the more straightforward versions of CBC, we have this idea called TikToks, which is task interfering thoughts and task orienting thoughts. And it's always really interesting as you start to think more carefully about a task that we're procrastinating or avoiding, to look at what the thoughts are that block people from doing. And it's very often some fear that it might make, although it's something we know will be helpful to us, there's often the fear behind it also that this might also somehow make us worse. Like, it's going to stress me out, or, I'll end up being too distracted. So you're in really good company. That the brain is sort of, and this is very true of our brains often, it's usually trying to protect us and help look after us in some way. It just may not necessarily be the best long-term thinker, that kind of protective side of our minds. So something that might be worth looking at is whether you could get a good list of those thoughts that come up about using your to-do list, like it's going to stress me out. I won't be in the right kind of frame of mind to handle it.
So what comes to me now is, again, the experience of the plane. What I did that day was choose 3 things that I wanted to complete. So that's not reality every single day, as in it's not 3 big tasks, because it was easy that day because I chose 3 big tasks that would take the time. Whereas sometimes it's more like small things, but almost having like 2 sides to my to-do list. One, which is, so in the evening, the night before, choosing which are the items in my list that I want to be visible the next day, specifically the next day, and almost only have those visible on the next day. So my to-do list is not my to-do list. It's
Not everything.
the to-do list of that day.
Target activities for the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, I've tried to do this with the Google to-do task things, where I literally put the tasks of the day. Somehow I've reverted back to the list because things come up, and then there is the unexpected that come up. After a meeting, something came up, and then you have to respond to it. So it does feel sometimes easier to have a list rather than them in the calendar. But I hadn't perceived that there was a negative feeling towards the list.
Yeah, there are. If we go back a step, there was the prediction that it's going to somehow stress you out, and also there's a kind of a thought that pops up. This is going to be a waste of time. Looking at this is going to be a waste of time. So we've got, if we were doing our classic TikToks technique, we'd get the line down the middle of the piece of paper, write those thoughts down on the left hand side as our task interfering cognitions, our tics, and then next to each of those we'd want to try and have some nice alternatives. What would you respond to? Because you've partly come up with a nice concrete plan of saying, well, I guess I could try and reduce the number of items on that to-do list so that it's not so overwhelming, maybe to transfer 3 key tasks onto my calendar or something. Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah.
Could you say anything else that might be a useful response to any of those task-interfering thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm thinking the waste of time. There's a long one to this. As in, you've done the effort of putting everything on the to-do list and really planning your to-do list. So it's not a waste of time. But it doesn't feel like a good alternative thought. I guess the plane exercise would be an alternative thought. As in, remember that day of the plane when, because you had the list, you were very effective.
Yeah.
Because it was, and I've done this plane thing several times, and it sort of works. As in, I've been on several planes and used it to be super effective, and it has worked.
When I've tried it out, it's actually been quite a useful use of my time. It's been productive, such as when I was on these plane journeys. Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing is, in the plane, I had only 3 things.
Yeah. Right. So what part of your strategy might be to try and, we can respond. There's a sort of compromise there, I think. Yes, I'm concerned. I don't want to completely overload myself. So I'm going to try and give myself a shorter list of action points for the following day. But to try and actually help me to get around to looking at that action list, I need to remember that it isn't always a waste of time. In fact, sometimes it can be quite productive. And Has it always stressed you out? Is it always the case that if you've looked at your to-do list, it's really made you feel worse?
No, until now, I always had related my to-do list as something that makes me feel. I actually have feelings of love towards, as in, I like it. I until now, I've never identified negative feelings, and it's something that I've worked for years to try and perfect. As in trying to get there.
And it's interesting, some of these thoughts are like that. They're kind of, in the cold light of day, you think, I'm not sure I actually completely believe that, but yet somehow they're still in the system, acting as these kind of blocks. So this is where CBC is often, as I think of it, it's like a sort of dino rod approach. You identify the blocks to greater performance in different ways, and you bring them to light. And once you brought them to light, you have the chance then to consider whether they may be 100% true or not. You maybe want to see whether you can put them to the test in some way. And I wonder when's the next opportunity to maybe try testing this out, doing this, running your to-do list a little differently.
So, no, it will be immediate. So for tomorrow, top priority. As in, it is something I'm working on currently. I'm trying to get a lot of things done. So I have in my mind the belief that if I master my to-do list, then I will be able to be more effective on a daily basis.
So just help me to be clear in my mind when the first time you're going to look at it would be tomorrow.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you to consider the challenge of this not being a reactive moment, of it being a planned moment.
I think it comes with something as well. So trying to schedule my first call almost like 5 minutes later every day, so that the first first thing I do when I get to my desk is not the first call, but rather, the other option would be to do it right after my first call. So if I cannot move that first call, then, if that is fixed every morning, then on weeks where, so there are weeks where I have that first call very early, or there are weeks where I don't. So if I don't, then it would be the second I sit down with my coffee on my desk. And if I do have that first call, that probably means I didn't have time to do my coffee before the first call. So I'll go down, get my coffee, and then sit down with my coffee and look at the to-do list.
Okay. And the helpful thoughts you're going to bear in mind to help you to commit to that are what?
So having the helpful thoughts the first action is having a shorter list, so that my helpful thought can be that remember the time in the plane when it worked, and I want to do today as the time in the plane, as if I was in a plane. So almost like wanting to be in a plane with no distractions and very planned day from before. And also, so I guess remember times when it worked. And hopefully increase those to my thoughts.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that might just be worth thinking about is whether just a little bump of increased discomfort, if you look at your to-do list for the day, whether that might be a price worth paying for the level of planning and strategizing that enables you to achieve for the rest of the day.
Yeah. So I think that's another one. So you're right. So almost like acknowledge the discomfort. So I'll feel a little bit of almost like with a vaccine, I'll feel the pinch, but I know I have the benefit of not getting sick.
Yeah. So that's part of, again, something that we're quite interested in CBC is the idea that we don't just have thoughts about things, we also have thoughts about our emotions. And that oftentimes the best thing we can do is just help people to, when it's in their interest, is to just beef up their tolerance of that bit of discomfort, because it's actually probably going to mean in the long run less of it.
And that one actually is the one I'm most comfortable with from everything we've spoken about, almost like taking in that discomfort, but for the pleasure of then at the end of the day having had a better a day where I did more.
Good. Does that give you some ideas to experiment with, to test out?
Yeah. I think that the key of all of this, now reflecting back as a coach observing the process, is the pinning down, of course, of when it's going to happen, that you were really pushing towards when in the day. So when are you going to do it? And not really letting me, and also not the fact that it was planned and always going to be on the same day, rather than letting it be after something that wasn't every day there. And the brushing of teeth.
Yeah, because you already identified the part of the problem was you were being too reactive about it, and that you were over relying on things that popped up. So that was probably, if that's been part of the problem, that's probably not what we want to rely on as part of the solution. Yeah.
So I'll look forward. It was interesting to see how, I was trying to choose something that wasn't deep or that wasn't in some way complicated to coach on. And so I chose something that seemed simple, like my to-do list. But you could still identify and that still something came up where I had no idea that fear or that those feelings were there. So it was super interesting to see.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing that example.
So this was, of course, anything else you want to say as a closure to the coaching for the audience to... You were there mentioning, of course, different things like what you were using and how you were how things were coming up, or is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners about that, about coaching with CBC?
From the perspective of our little session together then,
Yeah.
I think it just really nice. And this happens if I teach on this stuff. I very often do a demo session, and it is always a little, people are surprised that it's usually a little kind of quote unquote deeper than they think it's going to be. But that's the perspective. The model is, why do human beings why do they not operate optimally? What's interfering with them self-actualizing, growing, developing, following their hopes and dreams? And our model is, well, it's the meanings and thoughts. So once you've established what's going on and how the person wants to be different, the journey is trying to identify the thoughts and the alternative for the thoughts that are maintaining the problem, and the alternative thoughts that will help the person drive towards the solution. And then, as we did then, trying to find ways of changing behaviour that's going to try and support and develop those alternative thoughts. The process doesn't change very much, depending on whether you're dealing with something arguably, ostensibly at least, superficial, or relatively more personal, because it is personal. It's your thoughts, and if you could just make yourself stop it or pull yourself together, you would have done already. So something a bit more personal is happening, and so that's where it gets really interesting.
In terms of technology,
yeah,
how has technology helped CBC, or how has it hindered this approach?
Luckily, we now have good evidence that, again, in the clinical domain, and therefore, once again, we're having to infer towards coaching, that the efficacy of the approach translates very well to online platforms like Zoom and Teams and so on. So it doesn't seem to affect outcome very much. You have to be a bit more creative sometimes, particularly in terms of if you're wanting someone ideally in any coaching session, you want to make it as active as you possibly can. So you want to try and add, okay, show me this thing using your smartphone. Let's switch to FaceTime, and you take me to show me this particular piece of work, or the way your office looks, or how you're organising your diary, or even let's share as much information as we can. So, because it's that can be a frustration when that you usually would see something or kind of get hold of something in the room. I think things like the ease of recording sessions over systems like Zoom is a fantastic advantage, because we know that, again, in the clinical domain, people need fewer sessions if they're recording their sessions. And so, the frailty of human memory being what it is, despite some of our expectations about our human memories, it means that people forget a lot of what's said in a typical 50-minute session. So using that recording function is a massive advantage. And it has forced us to be more creative with things like using virtual reality as a mechanism. When we were in lockdown in particular, that obviously meant that how do we help people to confront their fears? And now you can even quite easily find on YouTube images of audiences sitting there looking at you. And if you have a bit of performance anxiety, it means you're not just rehearsing the speech, you can now just use your computer as a kind of virtual space to enhance practicing looking at an audience. So there's been, I think it's been massively helpful, and has generally speaking forced us to be more creative. I think there's a warmth and a kind of getting to know somebody that you miss. I certainly find I miss a little bit. I know that it's going to be hard to eliminate that kind of that personal touch entirely from our work, but I think in general the CBC has translated very well over to these more remote settings.
Is there anything about homework? Because you mentioned, of course, homework being a crucial part of it, in terms of homework and technology.
So more and more I'll use digital paper or iPad or something. If I'm drawing out diagrams and making notes and stuff, I can then just email them to my client. There are now some interesting packages being developed to send out texts and things to prompt people to carry out certain homework tasks. And I think that's also another interesting development in terms of technology. The guiding light should be, how can I make this session as memorable as possible, and not just rely on the hope that because you think you said something relatively useful, that that's going to stick. You need to ask your client to have made a note, to draw a picture, for us to think of an image, a metaphor. You might even think of how you're going to use a song to make it more memorable, to get someone into the right zone. You're going to send pictures, send emails, send copies of notes. So you're just trying to make this sort of virtual experience as tangible and as memorable as possible. And that, again, the more that you've got something concrete that someone can look at to remind them what the homework task was and how they were supposed to do it. Again, luckily, CBC has always had this relationship with forms and charts for people to fill out. And it's, in a way, it's almost easier to email someone the right form or chart than it is to remember to have it printed off to hand them in reality. The face-to-face world, for want of a better term.
Makes sense. In terms of a group environment, how does CBC apply there in teamwork?
Yeah, I actually think that there's a lot to be said for team coaching using CBC, because you can save a lot of time, because there's quite a bit of psychoeducational component of CBC. There's the idea of the cognitive model and understanding that. There is how to use maybe ABC forms of ways, or dysfunctional thought records as ways of learning to identify and challenge and change your thoughts. You can teach that in a group just as well as you can teach that one-to-one. You can show someone how to use the TikTok technique, as we've just talked about, in a group as well as you can use it one-to-one. So for the psychoeducation and skills training component, it's really a lot more efficient to share that. And you've also got the lovely thing in a group setting where if you and your client are struggling to generate alternative perspectives on a particular experience or event, well, you have a whole team of other brains in the room that you can also ask, has anyone ever had this kind of experience? How did you look at it? What was your thoughts about it? So you've got this incredible resource for alternative perspectives. You've also got this incredible resource for generating ideas of different things to try out. And you've got this great resource of other human beings going to remember to ask about how did that piece of homework go. You got someone who might say, actually, I'll give you a ring to remind you about that. I know that you'll forget about it. Or I'll be the person that said it. So you've got this. If you've got this. Really, I started my career as a therapist out as a group therapist, and actually struggled to get used to all the time I had on my hands for working with individuals one at a time. And of course, you can also use in team coaching, you can even use this structure of mapping out using a formulation like our 5 systems approach to map out, okay, what are the kinds of thoughts and beliefs that come up in this team that maybe aren't so helpful? Almost as a philosophy, do you think there's a group that the team has kind of gravitated towards? What habits maybe as a team have you guys sort of acquired that you sometimes don't think are that helpful? Okay, let's start to identify these patterns, these processes. And then as a team, let's see whether we can start to consider how helpful those thoughts, our behaviours are together. Let's also look for evidence for and against those thoughts. Let's look at the pros and cons of those behaviours. And then let's start to generate some alternatives. But then the beautiful thing about this model is we're not saying that these are the right thoughts or the right alternative behaviours. We are saying these are things to try out and they're experiments. So it's a no-lose, even if it completely tanks. Well, we've learned a lot then. If you guys operate in this new kind of way, work brilliantly, fab. But if it tanked or it had its problems, great, data. So we can then bring it back to the model, bring it back and then try and see if we can develop and build a better alternative. So I think it has a lot to offer.
That sounds like a great thing to have. Of course, it reminds me to when you were a teacher, you were giving us all the theory and having all that theory sharing. And so it feels a little bit like what you described would be similar. And you had us doing some of the exercises individually. And then, of course, you have the accountability group almost included to it, right. Which sounds like a great thing. And then using the frameworks as well for teams and having them experiment, which sounds also, I've never used CBC on a team, so it sounds definitely fascinating. Well, Rob, with that, I'm mindful of time, and any final thoughts you would like to leave our listeners with?
One is try and take a view that this is that whilst I appreciate wholly that coaches don't see patients and therapists typically don't go into workplaces to do their work, we have very different workplaces and different kinds of patients or clients. I think don't let that stop you from taking a broad view of there only ever has been one cognitive behavioural tradition and approach. Beck and Ellis and so on, the founders, were interested in how their models would apply to the workplace as soon as they developed them. This wasn't like some ponderous, slow, steady thought. We came around to the idea of how might this apply in the workplace, and then we needed coaching to be, as a tradition, to be invented for it to apply. It's anywhere where human beings experience stress, distress, struggle, need some help to unblock themselves. That's always been part of what we've considered where the cognitive behavioural tradition has a place. And so one of the reasons I say that is to then help people to think, well, if there isn't a good book that says cognitive behavioural coaching about the topic you're interested in, then look at some of the books that say cognitive behaviour therapy, or some of the articles you can find on Google Scholar, because there's going to be a lot of great data out there that doesn't take, I could speak as the person who does it, it does not take a rocket scientist to translate a lot of the findings from research and trials and things from CBT to CBC. And I'm hoping vice versa, as the field gets more rich and interesting. I really do strongly believe that therapists have a lot to learn from coaching as well. And I think my only other point would be that in the spirit of applying this model, just keep in mind that the idea is to be curious, and our job is to be the filter, though, between all of the techniques and all of the knowledge and all of the jargon and all the principles and practices of CBC. And we deliver in a way which shows great interest and curiosity about our clients' growth, development and well-being. But we try to be really careful not to seem too clever with all of our fancy techniques and principles. That's another thing I think that's probably quite helpful to keep in mind.
Where can our listeners find you?
Well, there's one or two chapters I've written in coaching texts. My online presence is relatively limited, partly because there's only one me and I'm relatively busy. There's been one or two other conversations with the AC about doing another demo session for them, which I'd be willing to do. Find out more about CBC and CBT in general as well.
Thank you so much. Well, Rob, thank you for your time. And it was great to hear your experience with translating cognitive behavior to coaching and to understand better how to do it.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another episode by the Association for Coaching. I have been Claudia Day. We hope this episode offers you some new insight and inspiration. For 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organizations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or explore our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. There, you can keep up to date with our latest episodes, enjoy the wealth of digital learning offerings, and gain insights from our Coaching Perspectives magazine.